Welcome to the Tech Trek, where technology leaders share their insights, experiences, and views. Every week I bring you a new guest. And on today's episode...
Hi everyone, I'm Shiva Parinandi. I'm currently the SVP of Cloud Infrastructure and Advancement here at Paramount Plus. Paramount Plus is a streaming company. It's pretty well known out there in the land. We are amongst the top 4 or 5 streaming companies within the US and pretty well known internationally as well.
Thanks for being on the show. Topic we're going to be chatting about today is dealing with the cloud at a pretty large scale. I think obviously Paramount Plus falls into that category. And I guess, just to start off, not knowing specific numbers, but just give us a sense, right? Because I think it's good for people to get a sense of when we say scale, just what does that mean? What does scale for you mean?
So Paramount Plus is home to many scheduled and live events. Like scheduled shows like the recently popular ones, like 1923 episodes. We see a lot of interest from audience on that. Then there's like live events. The AFCs is a big thing. Super Bowl that Paramount Plus is going to host next year. That's like millions upon millions users trying to watch the Super Bowl. We have already done a few of them on All Access, which was what Paramount Plus used to be called as before, and next year is going to be on Paramount Plus too. So the scale is very few companies see the kind of scale that Paramount Plus sees when it comes to some of these live events or hit shows or the Top Gun Maverick launches. There's a whole variety of them that happen every year.
Absolutely. I guess, when we talk about these things, and we'll talk about how you deal with some of the technical aspects, but on the business side, right? Obviously it's a growing business. There's certain demands, expectations for scale. You have, let's say the Super Bowl, it's a project, it's a year out. I'm sure plans are already in place or will be soon in place to make sure the team is ready. I guess from a business perspective, how soon do you get involved in that understanding that, hey, this is coming and I need to make sure that obviously whatever needs to happen on a technical perspective will happen to accommodate these business requirements?
It depends. First of all, that's a great question. It depends on the nature of the event. Some of them range from a few weeks, like, if it's like a new show of 1923 or a Top Gun Maverick movie launch. So that's few weeks to a quarter or so at most. But something like as large as Super Bowl, that's like at least a few quarters in advance that we start, because it's just not us. Paramount Plus, we depend on a lot of vendors behind the scenes. We use a lot of tools. We use the cloud. We have to get everyone in line to make sure that event is a success. So it depends on the scale of the event. Roughly, we know how much scale would come in just because of either the marketing efforts or our own estimates or like past history. So we can guesstimate how many users are going to come in. Sometimes those numbers are completely off. We think like, for example, we might see 10 million users, but there'll be like 25 million users showing up at the door. So we have to not only prepare for what we know, but also the unexpected part of those events.
I mean, that's a great point. How do you actually plan for the excess capacity? Because obviously, you can you try to right size it, but you could also overestimate by too large a factor. You don't want to be too lean on your estimations. But when you're sitting down and you're doing your planning, what is the goal in terms of that estimation, in terms of giving you a little bit of upside capacity?
There's a lot of science and a good amount of art involved in that estimation efforts. The science part of it is from what we know how the environment can perform. We know, if we scale to X number of pods, it can handle Y number of users. So we know that information. Then obviously there's a buffer. So we scale up to 1.5x or something to add for that buffer. Now, like in the scenario where I said, we are expecting 10 million users, but 25 million might show up. In those cases, we obviously want to keep the infrastructure lean enough that we can scale on the spot, like when we see those big uptakes coming in. So that's where the science part of it comes in, let's be prepared for 1.5. But the art is also about keeping things lean and ready to go even higher if needed, and making sure the entire infrastructure and the code base and everything can handle something like that. So there's multiple tiers of indirection that we have, or rather caching that we have, that can help with all the scaling and all the efforts behind it.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm a streaming user. I have a subscription to Paramount Plus as well. I feel like I add one, I have one of everything, but it is interesting, the expectation of consumers when it comes to streaming. We have such a short tolerance for delays of any kind. When you're approaching this, and obviously, the business and your involvement, your understanding, trying to give yourself more capacity, how do you simulate this? Obviously, you don't want the first go around to be when you're live, because that's, no one was going to allow that. But how do you run a simulation to see how so much stress the system can take, especially something like the Super Bowl, which, you'll know a certain amount of that going into it?
That's a great question. There's about 3 or 4 avenues we use for something like that. Obviously, at a high level, we do use CDNs extensively. Now, before I go too deep into the answer, there's 2 parts to the system. There's the entire website part of it, and then there's the streaming part of it. I'll talk more on the website part of it. The streaming it's a beast on its own. But on the website, what we do is we know the pattern in which the users are using our systems, whether it is for watching something like the Top Gun show or all the way up to Super Bowl. We have a very good sense of how they are navigating the system, and where do they land, and how do they get into it, and then how do they find the show that they are looking for, and all that fun stuff. And we also know the request rate for all of them. So we have extensive monitoring built out on our systems that tell us, at any point of time, this is the RPS. These are the number of users hitting us, or how many systems we have up and running, what's the CPU, memory, all that. It's very extensively built out. So we take all of this data. We have our own internal non-production systems. One of them is a performance environment. We have a very good performance team as well. They take all of this information, and then they try to replicate the production load as closely as possible. So now we don't get it always 100% right, because there's a small fraction of users who go and do something else that we never expect. And that's common in a lot of the websites. So we do a lot of randomization on our load tests. We make sure we have captured those 1-2% scenarios also when we are testing it out. However, the big difference is in production, we hit all of our vendors on the back end, like billing systems and all of them. You can't do that in your non-production system. So we have made sure, we can, in one way or the other, either mock it out or write to a dev null kind of stuff when we hit those scenarios, so we can cover them too. So it's a lot of trial and error to understand what users are doing on production and how to replicate it on a non-production environment. And then do those load tests, and then use decent like extrapolation algorithms to make sure, like, all right, if we hit like 10x of this load, what do we need to stay up and running?
I mean, obviously, there's it isn't one thing. It's interesting. It is, partially science, and I think when I'm hearing you speak about different parts of it, there's a little bit of art. I guess when it comes to Paramount Plus and the scale and making sure you're addressing that, right? I mean, obviously, different companies at different sizes will have different needs. When it comes to tools for your team, how do you start looking at that from the build versus buy? Because obviously there are tools for high scale, but obviously, then there's high scale and then there's high scale. So how do you view this maybe, discussion of, whether you build or you buy for kind of like the tooling you look for?
It's a great question. So there's 2 or 3 dimensions to that question. There is the tool itself. What can it do? But then the more important question is, what kind of a team do you have and how can they adopt that tool? Because a tool is only as good as the people that are adopting it. You can't, otherwise it's a useless piece of stack. So there are very few tools or like very few companies that approach the scale problem like what we do. Like I said, hosting something like Super Bowl is not a trivial task. It's extremely involved and a very high pressure, high scale situation. So when we evaluate tools, they have to absolutely fit the problem we are trying to solve. That's number one criteria, because I've been at places where the problem is made to fit the tool rather than the other way around. So we have to be extremely careful on that evaluation process. The second one is, given the fact that not many companies or many vendors or people that build tools have experience at this scale, we try to bring them in-house and make them or craft them to our needs rather than giving it away to someone else and say like, hey, you run this, because most likely they won't be able to handle that kind of load when it comes in. And then the third part is, most of the time we always buy tools that my team or the teams within Paramount Plus can adopt. Very rarely it has been the other way around. So making sure that there's a good fit between the talent and tool is extremely important. There's the last piece, which is a very important thing to also consider, is the tool itself needs to be able to, should be able to scale horizontally. Because we, as in Paramount Plus, our stack is, we are hosted completely in the cloud. We make sure we can distribute our cloud regions across the US. So we are, as of earlier this year, fully multi-regional. We are multi-regional capable, and we can spin up multiple regions within like different time zones, as depending on where our users are. So the tools that we also buy or build, we make sure that they can scale out accordingly, because we don't want like our stack in, let's say, in the central region, but the tool can only work in the east region. So that won't work for us. So that's very important. So it's about like 3 or 4 things at a high level. Of course, there's like things like pricing and what's the support of that, the support that we can get from that tool and all the other stuff. Those are obviously important, but these are like the most important criteria when we are evaluating tools at the scale.
Absolutely. I guess just to touch on it, because you mentioned talent within this component of build, buy, and obviously, adoption across other teams, your team. And I know, you've been at Paramount for a number of years now. When you actually do address that talent side, everyone, when you hear hiring managers at big companies, they're like, I want to have somebody who's dealt with scale. Have they seen scale? I guess when it comes to talent and kind of your team, when you're looking to hire, how big or small of a requirement is the need to have seen a certain size of a scale?
That's a great question. So when hiring for talent at scale, where we hire them is very important, because there's the handling the production environment. There, absolutely, you need someone at scale, someone that has operated at scale. But there's also like the internal people that handle internal environments, or DevOps processes and CI/CD and all that stuff. Their scale is like, most people have handled companies that are like, 10,000, 20,000 people already. So it's relatively easier to find and train and all that stuff. The crux of the problem is hiring talent that manage like these large events or like production environments. What we have taken the approach is, it's of course very difficult to find, great people, as we all know. It takes time. We make sure like the top tier people that are in there have that experience, and then we bring in people that are curious and hungry and have the appetite for taking on a challenge like this, and then grow them up. So the team that we have right now is not all of them ran Super Bowls or or a Thanksgiving retail event that are like similar size in the past, but a lot of them grew into it. They were sat on the sidelines first, observing how things are done, and then eventually grew into it. Like I personally myself never ran a Super Bowl prior to Paramount Plus, but I learned from the experts out here and eventually grew into that. So it takes time. It's not an easy task, and then you have to. It's almost like a big, massive chess game when you're handling. There's like so many pieces you have to take care of. There's no enemies. I mean, we love our end users. So I just meant the chess game from the point of how many things you have to keep track of and make sure everything is moving at an even pace.
Absolutely. That makes sense. Obviously, not easy to find people that have dealt with that scale all the time. I guess the one thing, we haven't touched on that I was thinking about, you mentioned being multi-cloud, multi-region, fully in the cloud, is the security component to this, the implications and kind of the impact to your team. And I guess maybe if you could talk a little bit about just that side, that'd be interesting.
So once you're in the cloud, you're as secure as it's a joint effort with your cloud vendors. It's not like security is fully their responsibility or fully our responsibility. So we have to be extremely cognizant of that fact. Yeah, you can't hand wave around that. And then in the cloud, it's even more challenging than when we were in the data center, because data centers obviously are locked down and you have full control on who is accessing what. But once you get into the cloud, you lose some of that a little bit. So this does involve us, putting in more control and audit frameworks in place, a control perspective in terms of who can do what. So we have frequent revisions and rewrites of our security policies and all that. But more importantly, monitoring what is going on in the cloud. Do we have people that have some illegal access, or a common problem everyone has these days is like their cloud, whether public or private, getting used for crypto mining. Make sure things like those don't happen on your side. So there's various tools that we use, and again those fall into the build versus buy discussion again. But But we have a very good team internally whose primary responsibility is to make sure the cloud is as secure as possible. We work very closely with our cloud vendor, Google or Amazon in this case, and make sure there's like frequent audits. There's like all these SOC compliance audits that we also go through to make sure nothing is slipping through the cracks. Knock on wood, so far we haven't had any major incident, and we are hoping to keep it that way.
Absolutely. No, that's. I mean, obviously, it's sounds like you need a good partnership to make all that work, and a lot of moving parts. I was going to say, thank you for being on. It's been great to hear your perspective of kind of the scale and the challenges. Before I let you go, I like to run through a few questions just to have everyone learn a little bit more about you. I guess the first thing I was going to ask is, what motivates you about your job? Obviously, it sounds like you've got a whole host of challenges, but what's that motivation to keep pushing forward?
That's a great question. So I've been in the industry for almost close to 25 years now. I think like in the past 3-4 years, I'm hitting about 5 years now in Paramount Plus, but in the past few years, the kind of problems I have solved, I haven't solved it anywhere else. So these are extremely unique problems to solve. It takes a lot of patience and tenacity and working closely with so many highly talented people to solve something like this. So that motivates me quite a bit. Just the scale that I was talking about, that is one big problem in itself. There's like lots of other challenges also. The next big thing is, I loved movies growing up. I used to watch a lot of them. TV shows, yeah, some, but not as many as movies. And it fits right in that alley of solving big problems in a space that is super interesting and growing quite a bit. And there's so much competition and everyone's trying to do something new and staying ahead of that curve. So put all of that together, it really motivates me quite a bit.
Absolutely. If you could take away one part of your job, maybe I don't know if we call it the least favorite because it might not be what you take away, but what would you take away? Like if you could remove one thing that you're like, is maybe your least favorite, I guess.
I love solving technical problems more than process related problems. Now, those are important. The process related problems, you want to have the process work for you versus the other way around. But I wish there was like one process that fits everyone and everyone is happy. That I would I enjoy less solving rather than the entire technical issues or the technical side of things.
Absolutely. What's a productivity hack that you found helps you manage your schedule or your day better?
I do a couple of small things that have helped me. One is I always make sure that I know what my day is going to look like tomorrow or the next week. So I'm I come prepared for that day. So that reduces the stress. The next big thing I take care is that I make sure I get enough breaks, whether in a day or overall, to keep my peace of mind going. It's very easy to get stressed out and burnt out over a period of time when you're dealing with all these large-scale issues day in, day out. So I would highly recommend anyone, find that zone where you can go in and have a mini or a micro vacation almost every day or every week. So you come back charged again. So that's something very important.
Absolutely. Last one for you. You mentioned as a kid you liked movies, obviously, and you're a successful professional now. But if you weren't doing this job, is there another thing that you would have done with your life instead? Is there something else that you'd have been like, that would have been my career if I was not in technology?
That's interesting. Haven't thought too much on that side, but I think I'm a lot into like meditation and yoga and all that stuff. So maybe that might be an alternate. I wouldn't say like career path, but helping out people from that aspect. So I probably would have considered that. Given a chance, I would still make a movie, but I'm not that rich enough yet. But maybe who knows?
Hey, you grew up and you're involved in the movies. That's pretty darn close. So I think you've done well, and it's great to hear that something that you had as a passion as a kid and as aligned as an adult. So that's awesome. Shiva, thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing. I thought it was great talking to you.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting me. Yep.
That's it for this episode. I'll be back again with a different guest, a different topic. Until then, please like, subscribe, share, leave a comment wherever you are watching or listening to this episode. I can't thank you enough if you do. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.